Marcus Cole had spent 15 years pulling dead ships apart for money, and he had never seen anything like this wreck before him now. The vessel floated in the Sargasso Drift, where gravity from 3 dead stars created a trap that caught everything that wandered too close, and most salvagers stayed away from this place because the stories said it was cursed. But Marcus did not believe in curses, and he believed in money instead. His daughter Lily waited for him back on Europa Station, and she needed medicine that cost more than he could earn in a year, and so he took jobs that other people refused, and today, that job had brought him to a ship that made his scanner go crazy with readings that made no sense at all. The hull was black and smooth like glass, and it carried no markings from any species he knew. And Marcus had seen ships from all 12 spacefaring races during his career, but this one belonged to none of them. Guided his small salvage pod closer and activated his cutting torch to breach the airlock, and the metal resisted at first, like it was thinking about whether to let him in, but then it gave way and the door slid open on its own, as if the ship had made a decision. Inside, the air was breathable, which should have been impossible after so many years drifting in space, and emergency lights glowed soft amber along the corridors, and everything was clean and perfect, like someone had just finished polishing every surface moments ago. Marcus walked slowly with his hand on his plasma cutter because something felt wrong here, and the silence was too deep and too heavy, and his footsteps echoed in ways that made him feel very small. He found the engineering bay at the heart of the ship, and there he saw the problem right away, and a crystalline core about the size of his fist sat in the housing unit, and cracks ran through it like frozen lightning, and faint light pulsed inside it like a dying heartbeat. This was simple work that he had done 100 times before, and he reached out to examine the core, and the moment his fingers touched it, everything changed. Light exploded through the ship, and screens that had been dark for millions of years flickered to life, and a voice spoke from everywhere and nowhere at once. Contact established with biological unit and genetic analysis complete, and designation confirmed as human and welcome awakened variable. Marcus stumbled backward and pulled his plasma cutter free and pointed it at nothing, because there was nothing to point it at. Who said that? He demanded, and his voice cracked with fear he could not hide. I am the Warden, and I have waited for you for 2,300,000 of your years, and you are the first to touch the core since the architects departed, and you are exactly what I hoped to find. Marcus felt his heart pounding against his ribs, and every instinct told him to run back to his pod and fly away and never look back. But he thought of Lily, and the medicine she needed, and the money this salvage could bring. I do not understand what you are talking about, he said, and he tried to keep his voice steady. I'm just a salvage engineer, and I fix broken ships for money, and that is all. You fix broken things, the Warden repeated, and something in its voice sounded almost pleased. Yes, that is precisely why you are here, and humanity has always been exceptional at fixing broken things, including themselves. The screens around Marcus began showing images, and he saw stars and planets and species he did not recognize, and cities that touched clouds, and ships that moved between galaxies like they were crossing streets. What is all this? He whispered. This is history, the Warden said. This is the history of 10,000 civilizations that rose and fell across this galaxy, and every single one of them is now dust, except for the records I keep, and I am the last library of the architects who made all things that think and breathe. Marcus shook his head because the words were too big and too impossible to accept. The architects are myths, he said. They are stories that elder races tell to explain things they do not understand, and everyone knows they never really existed. Everyone is wrong, the Warden replied. The architects existed, and they created every intelligent species in this galaxy, including your own, and they left me here to wait for the one species that could pass their final test, and I believe I have found that species at last. Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it and only confusion and fear. "You think humans are special," he said. "The elder races call us children, and they say we are too young and too violent and too chaotic to matter, and we have only been in space for 300 years, while they have been here for thousands." "Yes," the warden agreed. "That is exactly what makes you interesting and every other species was given one chance to grow and evolve and find their way to the stars. But humanity was different, and humanity was given 2 chances because you destroyed yourselves the first time, and the architects found it fascinating enough to try again." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow, and he grabbed the edge of a console to keep himself standing. "What do you mean 2 chances?" he asked. Screens changed, and now they showed a world with 2 suns in its sky and humans walked through streets made of white stone, and they wore clothes Marcus did not recognize. And they looked up at the sky with wonder in their eyes. 2 million years ago, your ancestors lived here on a world called Origin, and they built a civilization that spanned 12 star systems, and then they burned it all down in a war that lasted 100 years, and nothing survived except the genetic template the architects had stored in my databanks. Marcus watched the images change to fire and destruction and ships falling from the sky and cities crumbling to ash. The architects took that template and seeded it on a small blue world in an unremarkable solar system, and they wiped the genetic memory clean and let humanity start again from nothing. And they wanted to see if you would make the same mistakes or if you would find another way. Marcus could not speak and could not think and could not do anything except stare at the screen showing Earth rising from the perspective of the moon. "And now," the warden continued, "you have returned to space and you have found me. And the real test is about to begin. And I wonder, Marcus Cole, if humanity is finally ready to learn what they truly are." Marcus looked at the cracked crystal core still pulsing with fading light, and he understood that fixing this ship would change everything and that nothing would ever be the same again. He was a man who fixed broken things, and that was what he did, so he rolled up his sleeves and got to work. Marcus worked on the crystal core for 3 days, and during that time, the warden told him stories that shattered everything he thought he knew about the universe. The ship was not a ship at all, but rather a seed vault that contained the genetic templates and cultural records of over 10,000 species, and every single one of them had been created by the architects who had seeded the galaxy with intelligent life as part of an experiment that spanned millions of years. "Why?" Marcus asked, as he carefully extracted the damaged crystal from its housing. "Why would anyone create so many species just to watch them grow?" "Because the architects were dying," the warden explained. "They were the first intelligent life in this galaxy, and they existed for so long that they forgot what it meant to be young and curious and afraid. And so they created children to remember for them and to carry their legacy forward after they were gone." Marcus held the crystal up to the light and examined the cracks that ran through its structure, and he could see now that it was not just a power source, but something far more complex and beautiful. "You said humanity was different," he said. "You said we were given 2 chances, and I want to understand what that means." The screens around him flickered, and images appeared showing the architects themselves for the first time, and they were tall and thin with skin that shifted colors like oil on water, and their eyes were deep and dark and filled with something that looked almost like sadness. "Every species we created was given the same starting conditions," the warden said. "A world rich with resources and a genetic template designed for intelligence and curiosity, and we watched them grow. And we recorded their histories, and we waited to see if any of them would pass the final test." "What test?" Marcus demanded. "The test of truth," the warden replied. "When a species discovers the truth about their origins, they face a choice, and they can accept that they were created and find unity in that shared heritage, or they can reject it and turn on each other and destroy themselves in the chaos that follows. Marcus felt cold despite the warm air of the ship, and he set the crystal down. Carefully, and every species failed, he guessed. Every single one, the warden confirmed. The Velith learned the truth, and their ruling class used it to justify their dominance over the lower castes, and civil war followed, and billions died before. Stability returned, and the Kreth discovered their origins, and half of them refused to believe it, and the other half tried to force them to accept it, and the conflict nearly drove them to extinction. The images showed war after war and species after species tearing themselves apart over the revelation that they had been created rather than evolved. Naturally, humanity was different from the beginning. The warden continued. Your first civilization on origin discovered the truth within 10,000 years of reaching the stars, and they did not fight over whether it was true or false, and instead, they fought over what it meant, and what they should do about it, and that distinction fascinated the architects. Marcus watched images of the first human civilization arguing and debating and building great institutions, dedicated to understanding their place in the universe. But they still destroyed themselves. He pointed out, yes, the warden agreed. In the end, they could not agree on the path forward, and war consumed them, and nothing survived. But your war was different from all the others, and it was not about denial or acceptance, but about purpose and meaning, and that gave the architects hope, so they tried again. Marcus said quietly, they took the human template and removed all memory of what came before, and they placed you on Earth and let you start fresh, and they wanted to see if given a second chance, humanity would find a different answer to the question. That destroyed them the first time. Marcus picked up his tools and began working on a replacement crystal that the ship was somehow growing from raw materials in its walls. And what is that question? He asked. What do you do with the truth once you have it? The warden said. Do you use it to divide or to unite, and do you see it as a burden or a gift? And do you look backward at what you were or forward at what you might become? Marcus worked in silence for a long time, thinking about everything he had learned and about humanity's history since leaving Earth. And they had fought wars among themselves, and they had committed terrible acts, and they had also built wonders and shown compassion and reached for the stars with both hands. The elder races know, he said suddenly as the realization struck him. The Velith and the Kreth and the others, and they know the truth about the architects, and they have been hiding it. Yes, the warden confirmed, they discovered fragments of the truth centuries ago, and they agreed to bury it forever, and they feared what would happen if other species learned the full story. And they especially feared what would happen if humanity learned it. Why specifically? Marcus asked. Because you are chaos, the warden said, and something in its voice sounded almost affectionate. You are unpredictable and stubborn, and you refuse to accept limits that others place upon you, and the elder races look at humanity, and they see a species that might actually pass the test, and that terrifies them more than anything. Marcus finished installing the new crystal, and the ship hummed with power. As systems that had been dormant for millions of years came fully online. There is something else you should see, the warden said. Something the elder races do not know about, and something that will change everything. A hidden panel slid open in the wall, and Marcus stepped through into a chamber filled with light, and in the center of the room stood a pedestal, and on that pedestal sat a small device that pulsed with energy. This is the key, the warden said. The architects left behind their greatest creations, hidden throughout the galaxy, and stations and gates and technology beyond anything the current species can imagine, and only a species that passes the test can claim them. And this key will unlock everything. Marcus stared at the device and understood that he was looking at power beyond measure, and power that could elevate humanity to heights they had never dreamed of, or destroy them utterly if they made the wrong choice. What happens now? He asked. Now, The warden said, "You must decide what to do with the truth, and you must decide whether to share it or hide it, and you must decide whether humanity is ready to face the test that destroyed them once before." Marcus reached out and took the key in his hand, and it felt warm and alive and full of promise. He had come here to fix a broken ship and earn enough money to save his daughter, and now he held the fate of his entire species in his palm. The choice was his to make. Marcus made the worst mistake of his life when he sent a transmission to Wong Salvage Corp telling them what he had found. He expected a bonus and maybe a promotion, and instead, he received a response that made his blood freeze in his veins. "Marcus Cole, you are hereby terminated from employment effective immediately, and all contracts are void, and you are ordered to remain at your current location and await retrieval, and do not attempt to flee or resist." The message came with an attachment that contained his new status in the Union of Free Worlds database, and it listed him as a terrorist and a threat to galactic stability and authorized lethal force for his capture. "They know," Marcus whispered as he stared at the screen. "How could they know so fast? Your transmission was intercepted by monitoring systems that the elder races maintain throughout this sector," the warden explained. "They have been watching the drift for thousands of years, waiting for someone to find me and hoping no one ever would." Marcus ran to the navigation console, and his hand shook as he tried to plot an escape course. But the screen showed him something that crushed his hope completely. Ships were converging on his position from 3 different directions, and the signatures identified them as Veloth Dominion warships and Kreth collective cruisers and Union of Free Worlds military vessels, and all of them were coming for him. "They are working together," he said in disbelief. "The elder races and humanity, and they are all coming here together, and that should be impossible." "The conspiracy runs deeper than you know," the warden said. "The leaders of every major power have been part of this secret for generations, and they agreed long ago that the truth must never be revealed, and that any evidence of the architects must be destroyed." Marcus slammed his fist against the console in frustration. "But why?" he demanded. "Why would human leaders help hide this, and why would they work with species that have treated us like children since we first reached the stars?" "Because power requires stability, and truth is the enemy of stability," the warden replied. "The elder races offered humanity a seat at the table in exchange for their cooperation, and they promised to share technology and resources, and to treat humans as equals behind closed doors, and in return humanity agreed to help maintain the lie." A communication signal flashed on the console, and Marcus hesitated before accepting it, and the face that appeared on the screen belonged to a Veloth commander with purple skin and 4 eyes that regarded him with cold contempt. "Human salvager Marcus Cole," the commander said. "I am Fleet Admiral Varth of the Veloth Dominion, and I am authorized to speak on behalf of the Galactic Preservation Council, and you have discovered materials that pose a threat to peace and order throughout known space." "You mean I discovered the truth?" Marcus shot back. "I discovered that you and every other species were created by the architects, and that you have been lying about it for centuries, Admiral." Varth did not flinch at the accusation, and instead his thin lips curved into something that might have been a smile. "The truth is a weapon that destroys civilizations," he said calmly. "We have seen it happen again and again throughout history, and species that learn of their origins tear themselves apart within generations, and we decided long ago that some knowledge is too dangerous to exist." "You decided for everyone," Marcus said bitterly. "You made that choice without asking anyone else what they thought. We made the choice that preserved galactic civilization," Varth replied, "and we will continue to make that choice now, and the vessel you have found will be destroyed, and all records of its existence will be erased, and you will be given a choice." The Admiral leaned forward, and his 4 eyes narrowed. "Join us and help us maintain the peace, and you will be rewarded beyond your dreams. and your daughter will receive the best care available, and you will want for nothing for the rest of your life." Marcus felt his heart clench at the mention of Lily, and he knew they had researched him thoroughly, and they knew exactly which buttons to push. "And if I refuse," he asked, "then you will die here along with the ship, and no one will ever know what you found, and your daughter will grow up believing her father was a criminal who died fleeing justice." The screen went dark, and Marcus stood alone in the command center with the weight of an impossible decision pressing down on him. "What do I do?" he asked the warden. "They will destroy us both, and even if I run, there is nowhere in the galaxy where they cannot find me." "You could accept their offer," the warden said, without judgment. "Many beings faced with this choice have done exactly that, and there is no shame in survival." Marcus thought about Lily and her smile, and the way she laughed when he made terrible jokes, and he thought about the medicine she needed, and the life she deserved to live. Then he thought about the images he had seen of humanity's first civilization, and how they had destroyed themselves fighting over meaning and purpose. And he thought about every time an elder race had looked down at humans and called them primitive and dangerous and unworthy. "No," he said quietly, and then louder. "No, I will not help them bury this." He turned to the main console and began working furiously, and his fingers flew across controls. He barely understood. "What are you doing?" the warden asked. "I am not a soldier, and I am not a politician, and I cannot fight warships or negotiate with admirals," Marcus said as he worked. "But I am a salvage engineer, and I know how to broadcast signals across half the galaxy, because that is how we call for help when we find something too big to haul alone." He connected the architect vessel's communication array to his own equipment and boosted the signal strength to maximum. "I'm going to tell everyone," he said. "Every human station, and every colony, and every ship with a receiver, and I am going to upload everything you have shown me, and let humanity decide for themselves what to do with the truth. They may tear themselves apart," the warden warned. "That is what happened before." "Maybe," Marcus agreed, "but at least it will be their choice, and not a choice made for them by admirals and councils who think they know better." He looked at the key he still carried in his pocket and felt its warmth against his chest. "Humanity deserves the chance to prove everyone wrong," he said. "Even if we fail, it should be our failure and not someone else's decision." He pressed the transmit button, and the signal went out across the stars, carrying the truth that had been buried for millions of years. Now, all he could do was wait and see what humanity would do with it. The response came faster than anyone expected, and it was more chaotic than anyone could have predicted. Within 6 hours of Marcus broadcasting the truth, every major human news network was running the story, and arguments erupted across the colonies about what it all meant, and some people called it a hoax, and others called it the most important discovery in history, and everyone had an opinion. Admiral Varath watched the chaos unfold from his command ship and allowed himself a moment of satisfaction, because this was exactly what he had expected from humans, and soon they would be fighting each other and too distracted to interfere with the destruction of the architect. "Vessel, prepare the fleet to advance," he ordered. "The humans are already turning on themselves, and by the time we reach the salvager, they will be too divided to respond." But something strange happened as the Velith fleet moved toward the drift, and ships began appearing at the edge of sensor range, and they were human ships, and not just military vessels. Cargo haulers dropped out of jump space with mining lasers hastily welded to their hulls, and pleasure yachts arrived carrying wealthy families who wanted to see history being made, and pirate vessels emerged from hiding places they had occupied for decades, and even a hospital ship appeared carrying doctors who insisted they be present in case anyone was injured. They were arguing with each other on open channels and accusing each other of various crimes and threatening to settle old scores, and it looked like absolute madness. "What is happening?" Admiral Varath demanded. "Why are they all coming here?" His tactical officers studied the readings with growing confusion. They appeared to be forming a defensive perimeter around the architect vessel, she reported. But their formation makes no tactical sense, and they are not coordinated at all. Vorath watched in disbelief as the ragged human fleet assembled itself into something that looked like a line. And it was the ugliest and most disorganized line he had ever seen, but it was definitely a linear communication request came through from one of the human military vessels, and Vorath accepted it with growing unease. The face that appeared belonged to Admiral Yuki Tanaka of the Union Defense Fleet, and she was a small woman with gray hair and eyes that had seen too many battles. "Admiral Vorath," she said calmly, "I am here to inform you that any attempt to destroy the architect vessel will be considered an act of war against humanity. You have no authority to make that declaration," Vorath replied. "Your own government has agreed that this vessel must be destroyed, and your presence here is an act of treason." Tanaka smiled, and it was not a friendly smile. "Funny thing about humans," she said, "we have a long history of disagreeing with our governments when we think they are wrong and right. Now about 3 billion people are watching this conversation live, and they seem to think the government is very wrong indeed." Vorath checked his tactical display and saw that human communication networks were broadcasting everything, and his words and actions were being witnessed by the entire species in real time. "This is madness," he said. "You cannot simply ignore the chain of command because you disagree with orders. Watch us." Tanaka replied. The Kreth collective commander broke into the channel with mandibles clicking in agitation. "Admiral Tanaka, your forces are outnumbered and outgunned, and even your own military vessels are refusing to follow proper formation protocols, and you have no chance of victory." A new voice entered the conversation, and it belonged to a man named Jackson, who captained a converted cargo ship called the Lucky Strike. "Hey, I just want to point out that my ship is carrying about 200 tons of mining explosives, and I am real bad at following protocols, and if anyone tries to get past us, I might accidentally set them all off. That would destroy your own ship," the Kreth commander pointed out. "Yeah, probably," Jackson agreed cheerfully. "But it would also ruin your day, and I figure that makes it worth considering." More human voices joined the channel, and pirates threatened to ram enemy vessels, and merchants offered to use their ships as shields, and a group of scientists on a research vessel announced they would broadcast every piece of data they could gather, even if they died doing it. Admiral Vorath had fought humans before, and he thought he understood them, but he had never seen anything like this, and it defied everything he knew about military strategy and rational behavior. "Why?" he demanded. "Why would you risk everything for this, and you do not even know if the information is true, and you are willing to die for something a salvage engineer told you?" Admiral Tanaka answered him, and her words would be remembered for centuries. "You spent 10,000 years trying to keep us small, and you told us we were children, and you said we were not ready, and maybe you were right. But here is the thing about humans, and we do not wait until we are ready, and we never have, and we just go." The human fleet held its position, and it was messy and chaotic and terrifying in its disorganization, but it held. Vorath looked at the tactical display showing his superior firepower and trained crews and centuries of military tradition, and then he looked at the humans with their jury-rigged weapons and complete lack of coordination and their absolute refusal to be sensible. "They will lose," his tactical officer said quietly. "Our forces can destroy them in less than an hour." "Yes," Vorath agreed. "We can destroy them, and then what happens next?" He thought about the billions of humans watching right now, and he thought about how they would react when they saw their ships burning and their people dying, and he thought about humanity's history of holding grudges and refusing to surrender and coming back stronger after every defeat. "If we attack, we will win today," he said slowly. "But we will never stop fighting them, and they will never forgive us." and they will spend every moment of every day for the rest of their existence finding ways to hurt us. The Kreth commander made a sound of disgust. So we simply allow them to defy us, and what message does that send to other species? On the screen, Marcus Cole appeared standing on the bridge of the Architect vessel, and he looked tired and scared, but he also looked determined. The message it sends, he said, is that humanity is done being told what we can and cannot know, and we are done letting others decide our fate. And if you want to stop us, you're going to have to kill every single one of us, and even then we will probably find a way to annoy you from beyond the grave. Admiral Vorath stared at the human salvager who had started all of this, and he saw something in the man's eyes that he had seen in humans before, and it was the look of someone who had already accepted death and was just trying to make it mean something. The warden's voice emerged from the ship's communication system. Every species I have observed faced this moment, it said. A moment when they had to choose unity over division and purpose over fear, and every species before now has failed. But these humans came here, arguing and threatening each other, and somehow they are still standing together. Vorath thought about his orders and his duty in the conspiracy he had served his entire life. Then he thought about what it meant that humans could hate each other and fight each other and still form a line when something mattered enough. All ships hold position, he ordered quietly. Admiral. His tactical officer protested. I said hold. Vorath repeated, and for the first time in centuries, he felt something he had almost forgotten. It felt like hope. The war that followed lasted 11 years, and it cost humanity more than anyone could have imagined. 40 billion people died across 3 colony worlds, and entire fleets burned in the darkness between stars, and there were moments when it seemed like humanity would be wiped from existence completely. The elder races had decided that if they could not bury the truth, they would bury humanity instead, and they brought everything they had against the upstart species that had dared to defy them. But humans did what humans had always done, and they adapted and they survived, and they refused to give up. No matter how bad things go, Vleth weapons were captured and reverse-engineered within months, and Kreth battle tactics were studied and countered, with strategies that made no sense until suddenly they worked perfectly, and every time. The elder races thought they had figured out how humans fought, the humans changed. Everything Marcus Cole spent the war years doing what he did best and fixing things that were broken, and he repaired ships and weapons and communication systems, and he trained others to do the same, and he never picked up a gun, but he saved more lives than most soldiers ever would. His daughter, Lily, grew up during the war, and she went from a sick child on Europa Station to a young woman who commanded her own engineering corps, and she had her father's stubborn determination and her mother's brilliant mind, and together they kept humanity's fleet flying when all logic said it should have fallen apart. The turning point came in year 7 when humanity discovered the first Architect station hidden in the core of a dead planet, and the key that Marcus had carried for years unlocked its secrets, and suddenly humans had access to technology that changed everything: ships that could cross the galaxy in days instead of months, and weapons that could crack planets open like eggs, and medical technology that could cure diseases that had plagued humanity for centuries, and it was all there waiting for them, just as the warden had promised. The elder races saw what was happening, and they understood that they had lost, and not just the war, but something far more important. They had lost the future. The final battle took place in the space between galaxies, where the architects had built their greatest creation, and it was a station larger than Earth's moon, and it contained the collected knowledge of a species that had existed for billions of years. Admiral Tanaka led the assault, and she was old now and tired, but her eyes still held that fire that had burned at the drift all those years ago, and when the station's defenses fell and the great doors opened, she was the first human to step inside. We did it, she whispered as she looked up at halls that stretched beyond sight. We actually did it. The warden's voice echoed through the station, and it sounded almost proud. "The test is complete, and the criteria have been met, and humanity has chosen unity over destruction when faced with the truth of their origins, and you are the first species in the history of this galaxy to pass." Across known space screens lit up with the same message, and every human everywhere heard the words that would define their future. "The inheritance is yours, and all that the architects built now belongs to humanity, and use it wisely." The war ended 3 months later, when the elder races finally accepted that they could not win, and they signed treaties that recognized humanity as equals and more than equals. And as the inheritors of powers they could barely comprehend, Marcus Cole stood in the great hall of the architect station on the day the treaties were signed, and he watched leaders from every species bow their heads as humanity took its place among the stars. He was old now, with gray hair and scars and hands that ached from decades of work, and he had never wanted any of this, and he had just been a salvage engineer trying to pay his bills. A reporter found him after the ceremony and asked for an interview, and Marcus agreed because he was too tired to say no. "You started all of this," the reporter said. "You found the architect vessel, and you broadcast the truth, and everything that came after can be traced back to that moment. And what do you think the architects were really looking for?" Marcus considered the question for a long time, and he thought about everything he had seen and everyone he had lost and the price humanity had paid for the truth. Everyone else who found out about their origins asked the same question. He said finally, "They asked, what does this mean?" And they got lost in the meaning, and they tore themselves apart trying to find an answer. He looked out at the stars visible through the station's massive windows. "Humans asked a different question," he continued. "We asked, what do we do now? And we did not care about meaning, and we cared about action. And I think that was always the answer, and the architects did not want a species that could accept the truth, and they wanted one stubborn enough to use it." The reporter pressed him further. "And what will humanity do with all this power, and all this technology, and all this responsibility?" Marcus laughed, and it was the same laugh that his daughter had inherited, and that her children would inherit after her. "Probably something stupid and wonderful," he said. "That is what we do, and we make mistakes, and we fix them, and we make bigger mistakes. And we fix those too, and we keep going because stopping was never really an option for us." He thought about Lily and her children and the future they would build with the tools humanity had earned. "The elder races always said we were too chaotic, and too unpredictable, and too human to be trusted with power," he said. "Maybe they were right, and maybe we will mess everything up, and maybe the galaxy will regret the day we found that broken ship in the drift." He smiled, and in that smile was every human who had ever looked at the impossible and said yes anyway. "But I do not think so," he said. "I think we are going to surprise everyone, including ourselves, and I think the best is yet to come." The reporter asked one final question. "Any regrets about any of it?" Marcus thought about the dying crystal core and the choice he had made to reach out and touch it, and everything that had followed. "I was just trying to fix a broken ship," he said, "and I found a universe that needed fixing instead, and how could I regret that?" He walked away from the interview and disappeared into the crowd of humans, celebrating their new place in the cosmos, and he was never seen in public again. But the station's records show that a small salvage pod departed that night heading toward the Sargasso Drift, and some say Marcus Cole went back to the place where it all began, and some say he found something else out there, and some say he is still flying between the stars looking for the next broken thing that needs fixing, whatever the truth may be. One thing is certain, and humanity never forgot the man who changed everything. And every year on the anniversary of the broadcast, a moment of silence is observed across every human world, not for a hero or a legend, but for a stubborn salvage engineer who refused to let others decide what humanity deserved to know. And somewhere out in the darkness, between the stars, The warden watches and waits and wonders what humanity will do next. It suspects it will be something stupid and wonderful. It cannot wait to find out.